that will differentiate Bahrain regionally. It will differentiate Bahrain even in the Middle East as a tourist destination. And so these kind of projects that we're undertaking now are activation of destinations and areas. These are more long-term, so they don't necessarily have short-term financial benefit for us, but they have long-term economic and strategic benefit for Bahrain. And so these are also the kind of projects that we undertake. We have a fairly large team. We are close to 120 staff. And we also have subsidiary companies. So we've developed a Bahrain Car Parks company we own 36% of that company, and that's our car parks arm. We have also a property management company, EPMC, which looks after the properties, which is also a subsidiary. And so we are, in addition to being kind of developers, we are also, just like Mumtalakat, we own subsidiary companies that are dedicated and focused in different areas. And I don't want to get too ahead of myself, so I will stop, and maybe if there's questions or if you would like to redirect me in a direction.
Agree. What we'll do, we'll have more of a one-to-one and sort of go backwards and forwards. We have discussed the questions. The students, luckily enough, they do quite a bit of research about our guests. So they have looked at your CV and they prepared things actually outside the borders of Edamah as well. But let me just start off by saying it's very interesting because obviously, what you've mentioned here has happened in a very short period of time at Edamah. I know people at Edamah from a couple of years ago, before your tenure basically, and I know what kind of projects they were getting up to. But Edamah now, in your current tenure, and it's a very different ballgame. So, not to put two and two together, but we've been talking about resources a lot, and people is a very important resource we've been talking about. So, obviously, your vision, at the beginning, has definitely put certain things into perspective. But beyond yourself, what has really changed? Has there been a new direction, a new vision? Because a couple of years ago, this wasn't really the direction Edamah was having. So
it's a very relevant observation, and I would agree with you. And typically, if you know, and again, I'm sure you've studied this in terms of the governance of how companies work. The board is the key element here, and this is where the shift has happened. And so I actually started, before I became the CEO, I was actually a board member, and a new board was formed. And so when the board is typically responsible for putting the strategy in place, right? So the management are the execution of the strategy. The development of the strategy typically is the responsibility of the board of directors. And so the board of directors, under the chairmanship of His Excellency Khalid al-Rumayhi, is a very different board than the previous board. Khalid's background is one that, so he used to be the CEO of EDB, Economic Development Board, and subsequently now he's the CEO of Mumtalakat. And so his background, number one, has always been very strategic and very economics focused. And he's also somebody who's come in from the private sector. So he used to work at Investcorp for many years. And so he brought that culture and mentality also to Mumtalakat and to Edamah. And so the vision at the top really drives direction. The strategy was developed by the board. I was part of the team that put that strategy together. And now the execution is up to the management, and I've been heading the team here to execute on a strategy that we developed back in 2017. So the answer to your question is yes, there was a shift in direction. There was an activation strategy for Edamah, and really an alignment of Edamah, what was happening even at a higher level. And so you may or may not know, but there has been a significant reform structure under His Royal Highness the Crown Prince that includes not just the revamp on the ministry side, so we have new ministers, younger ministers who have joined the cabinet, but the important part is that there has been an alignment under the FDPM of all of these entities. And so they're all working for a similar objective under the guidance of His Royal Highness. And so, yes, it's a top-down strategy that has been implemented, and what you've witnessed in terms of movement and maybe change of direction for Edamah is exactly that.
All right, thank you very much for that answer. I think, yes, clearly it does show, when you have a complete overhaul and restructure and a new vision and, let's say, fresh blood, I think these are all vital components to make any kind of difference, whether it's public or private or whatever it is. And we're very happy to hear that, as citizens, at the end of the day, this is our sovereign fund. So it's very proud and very good for us to know that it's in very safe and capable hands, and there's always room for development. And I think this is where, what you've been focusing on in a very short period of time. It's less than 3 years, which is amazing. Especially us, talking about just visitors of the actual area. So obviously last week we were talking to urban planning and listening to, their views and who they work with and what they do. So if we take, let's say, just the terminal and from a planning point of view, just seeing what kind of organization this does, what kind of, again, we talked about social, we're talking about economics here, we're talking about positive externalities, we're providing things where, it wasn't great, you're going to an expensive restaurant or a nice restaurant, you're parking on a pavement, it's not, it doesn't really fit the whole vibe, let's say, or understanding. So this is all fits in, I think, to a منظومة. What I'll do is I'll start, passing students along with a few questions they have, and we will go into more detail as well. Who wants to start? Ayman? Ayman wants to start? Okay.
So first of all, thank you, Mr. Ayman. My question is,
وحتى الميكروفون حتى الصوت بعدين.
So first of all, thank you, Mr. Amin, for your time. So my question is, how did Edamah participate in Bahrain Economic Vision 2030?
So the Vision 2030 document, and it's funny because this is a document that I've lived with for 2 decades, and we're actually getting close to the end of it. The other day I was just thinking there's not that many years, but that's been the guiding document. And so if you want to think of the Vision 2030 as a government strategy, if you want to think of the Vision 2030 as an articulation of a vision, but also kind of a guiding, that's the document that really is the one that is forcing the alignment between all the different agencies, Edamah included, within the government structure. And so it's a very far-reaching document. It's a very comprehensive document, but it's also very, very high level. And so what's required is for each of the government entities, each of the stakeholders, if you will, to develop from the Vision 2030 kind of a more detailed strategy. And I think that really is something that's been part of the Edamah strategy. So it's been a reference for us. Definitely it's been a reference. But more to the point with Edamah, the architects of the Vision 2030 are stakeholders in Edamah. And so our strategy was one that was vetted and looked at by the same people who had put this document together. So we had consultations with FDPM office directly, with Ministry of Finance, with Mumtalakat, with urban planning. The other aspect that I wanted to maybe bring up with relation, because you brought up the document itself, is that any document really, if it wants to be relevant over such a broad or a long period of time, needs to also be high level. It can't be prescriptive. It can't be, because things change and you need to be able to adjust and change accordingly. So it needs to be a document just like a constitution. It needs to be a document that doesn't get into the detail, but provides the high-level guidance. And so that's how we look at that document.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for giving us some of your time. I have a question regarding RIRA. Since RIRA became a known entity in Bahrain.
Sorry, I can't hear you that well.
I want to talk about RIRA restrictions. Since RIRA became a known entity in Bahrain, how did it affect your project in an overall view?
So RIRA, which is the Real Estate Regulatory Authority, and you use the word restriction. So in my view, and again, this is a view of somebody who's worked for a good 20 years in the private sector before I joined Edamah. The regulation is necessary. I don't see it as restrictive. I see it as necessary because it builds confidence in the system. And I was around in the early 2000s, late 1996, 2000, where there was really no significant restriction on activity within the real estate sector. This led to two things. One, it led to a boom in real estate because everybody could enter into this market and develop. But it led to another thing. It also led to a big bust. It led to a crash in the real estate market because there was no regulation. And at the time, they had a model which was based on off-plan sales. And so a lot of developers were selling units that they had not built. So there was a speculative element associated with the kind of projects. And the money that was collected by these developers was used to start other projects, not to go towards the building of the existing project. And so you had a situation where a lot of companies became very big because they had maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects all of a sudden, but they hadn't executed on any of them. And the lack of regulation really created a false economy. It created a bubble, if you know what that is in economics. It led to inflated asset prices. It led to valuation of companies that were not sustainable and not justified. And so the role of the regulator is to make sure, number one, that developers act within a good governance track. They are transparent, but it also provides protection for consumers. And when there's protection for consumers, and in the case of real estate, these are buyers, investors, this brings confidence. And there is nothing that is better for a market than to instill confidence in the market. The more people are confident, the more they will invest. And the more speculative a market, the more untransparent the market, the more people will stay away from it. So the goal really, and this Dubai suffered from this to a certain extent, along with Bahrain, because we were more advanced in terms of the type of product the type of real estate project that was being offered. The introduction of these regulation, I think, will create sustainable growth. It will weed out a lot of players in the market. And I'm sure a lot of people will be upset maybe that they have restrictions, but for the market as a whole, it is necessary. And in the long run, it is something that I think will inspire more confidence and more investment. Sorry, you're on mute, Victor.
Okay.
Morning, Mr. Amin. My question is, in Edamah projects such as Salmania Car Park in Bilal, Jazair, what did Edamah do to promote and inspire environmental, responsible, and sustainable way of life in the kingdom?
So the concept of sustainability and environmental consideration in real estate is one that is gaining a lot of traction. And here the regulation can play a big role. And I think that I think that more can be done in terms of forcing developers to consider these. But I know that the regulations now put developers in a position where they have to consider things like power and the recycling capability of buildings, the self-sustainability of buildings to produce power. So things like solar energy, things like efficient structures, things like insulation requirements for buildings. All of these things are now law, they're regulation, and you have to meet a certain level. And so these are things that we have definitely taken into consideration in our projects. But we don't want to just limit ourselves to what the law prescribes. We want to go beyond. And so one of the things that we're starting to do now is to really look at green technologies in terms of applying them. There is something called the LEED certified. So there are certain levels of what they consider to be green buildings. And so we aspire to get those certifications. So it's very much part of, and if you remember when I talked in the beginning about non-financial considerations, there's also a social obligation that we have as a company to make sure that we adopt kind of the best practice in this regard.
I actually have a question related to the same point as well. Last week when we were talking to urban planning, we've been looking at basically green development or sustainable building, let's say. Now, I was saying to the class, دول برا خاصة في أوروبا وأمريكا, to basically create or motivate developers to be green and more sustainable, they create both financial and non-financial incentives. So you mentioned, for example, like infrastructure and all of that. So we can imagine, for argument's sake, that if developers would come with a more sustainable approach, as a financial, they can say, well, the infrastructure fee is 12 dinars per square meter. Because you've done such a great job incorporating sidewalks, solar panels, whatever it is, from 12 we'll make it into 6, for example. Obviously, our guests smiled because I know it's not the time to start giving discounts. But I said possibly there's another way, which is non-financial incentives. So if you are green, they can bring down the processing of your development or master plan from 180 days to 30. And obviously, as a developer, you would know you get considerable indirect benefits from your bank, from your loan, from your investors. That time is worth something. So do you see, I'll rephrase it now, that brief. You're a government or semi-government organization, you have that mother or father attitude towards development. Now, other more private developers won't be as, should I say, generous with what they build with. So do you believe that the climate is right to motivate people to be green if they don't have to be?
So there's two parts to this. And as you said, being a government entity or part of the government structure, we can afford to really put these considerations sometimes ahead of the commercial decisions. In the private sector or in the non-government sector, you really have to, in my opinion, do a motivation not for the developers, but for the public at large, for the consumers of this product. And so today, for example, because really what motivates the private sector is demand. It's customer demand. It's what people are asking for. This is paramount for them because they have to build what they can sell. And so if all of a sudden consumers start to demand higher levels of sustainability within their buildings or the homes that they buy or the units that they buy, then developers will be hugely incentivized to provide that product. And so I think the government can do a lot, but it can only do so much. Really, there's an awareness that goes beyond the government, which is to the end user. So as long as you have end users who are willing to say, you know what, I don't care if this is efficient, I just need it to be cheap. Or I don't care if the windows, and I want the cheapest windows, and I don't care. But, it's kind of like, why the fast food industry is dominant, right? People are, they don't put their health maybe where they should be putting it and say, know what, I'm not going to eat this stuff. I'm still going to demand it. And as long as there's demand, somebody will supply, right? And so the real success I think we will have in terms of really pushing sustainable and environmental consciousness is that it becomes something that the المجتمع يطلب. يعني this is something that society now deems as a requirement. This has to be something that is in the buildings. Otherwise, we will not buy them. They become non-commercial.
Hello, thank you for having us first. Regarding corporate social responsibility, what do Edamah do in this? For instance, do they let properties for non-profit organization or other things? Thank you.
So Edamah is quite active in terms of its social or obligation towards social responsibility. Now we have one actual dedicated property in Adliya, which we rent at a very subsidized rate to societies. So these are high صوب نادي الخريجين في العدلية. So these buildings we are happy to give them really at a nominal cost. على 150 دينار وما شابه. Simply because we feel we need to encourage organizations that are non-profit. So these are organizations that are part of civil society. Some of them deal with like a deaf society or a handicapped society, or they are fulfilling a social good, and we feel we should support them by providing them with facilities, with offices at rates that are very, very nominal. And so this is an active participation that we do on an ongoing basis. In addition, each year we look for opportunities to support an initiative. Sometimes these initiatives are related to. So we did some work with the Down Syndrome Society back in 2018. So each year we try to look for ways where we can support. This year we did some COVID support. We felt that was just a more urgent thing for us to do. But next year it could be something completely different. So it's an ongoing concern for us and an ongoing commitment.
Thanks.
So my second question is, will we see Edamah entering the housing market in the near future or no? That's my question.
Okay, so Edamah's mandate is really focused more on the commercial and investment projects. In Bahrain, we have a ministry and a bank that are focused more on the housing. So we have a housing ministry, and we also have Bangliskan. So our focus has been primarily on commercial projects. Now, there is an area where we could get involved, which is hospitality, which we consider to be commercial, even though there is an element within hospitality that could be, for example, villas on the beach or maybe condos on the beach, which are part of kind of a touristic project, but we could still be active in that regard. But we don't do social housing. We don't do the more traditional type of housing projects that typically would be done by either the Ministry of Housing or Iskan Bank. We haven't, it's not really part of our focus.
Thank you.
Since 2006. Since 2006, did you include more sustainable ideas through a 14-year timeline with each project?
So the sustainability, again, I go back to the earlier discussion that we had. It's definitely something that has been at the forefront since I was involved. And I haven't been here since 2006. I only joined recently, actually, back in 2018. But so I can't speak too much about the previous period. There was a different management and a different focus. And I think that really the previous focus and the management was much more Edamah as a land bank than really as a developer. And so the development side really has kicked off recently. And yes, sustainability is part of that.
My third question is, yesterday we were talking about the Mercado project, which was executed by Bahrain First company. So we have seen the impact of the project on as an area, as a commercial area, and now we see in the area more malls, more shops, more restaurants. So we want to know your personal point of view on Al Mercado impact, Al Mercado project impact on SAR area.
Okay, so I can tell that you've done your research on me, because I was the CEO of First Bahrain. I was the founding CEO of that project also. So Al Mercado was a project that was really we thought of how to come up with a project that had two elements that would complement each other. And so you'll notice that Mercado is actually a mixed-use project. Mercado has a commercial element, has a mall, and it also has 42 villas on the backside. And so one of the things that we found is that sometimes when you create a development and you include different elements, and so you have elements that are residential and elements that are commercial, that they feed off of one another. So, for example, the supermarkets and the shops that are at Al Mercado are benefiting from the fact and that there's 42 villas right next to them that are using them. And the people who are thinking about buying villas in Janabiyah will buy Al Mercado because they are next door to all of the facilities, right? And so they complement each other. And really, the idea or the premise behind good planning is to come up with mixed-use projects that complement and do not compete. And so create environments where there is synergy. And synergy is very important for a project to succeed. And you will notice that in some areas of Bahrain, when this comes out of balance, so for example, if you had a residential area that all of a sudden gets too much commercial, and all of a sudden you lose that synergy and balance, and people start to leave because they don't want to be, they can't park, they can't get their cars in the right area. And really, this is the job of urban planning. And so if you talk to North Jamshir, I think you was it North that spoke to you? So, okay.
One of
Excuse me?
one of
Okay. So the idea is with Al Mercado was to come up with a community mall and to build a community next to that mall to benefit from it. And I think that it really worked for us well in that regard. And I can tell you there's never been a project where I received more complimentary emails than for that project. And that area, when we developed, we were the first movers. Now today you go, you'll see so much stuff. There's atrium, but we were the first to move in that regard, and we received a lot of thanks from the people who are living in that community for providing that additional service.
I think that's a very important point. So, so just for your information, as well. So actually, we're based inside Aterium Mall, as you probably know, the British University. So, for us, you know, who are رواد المنطقة now on a daily basis, and people who have seen this area before see that sometimes all you need is a seed to be planted. And I think maybe we can compare this very much to Dubai, because Dubai was always an advocate for put something in the distance and then fill that space between it and the rest of civilization. So I think this is where, you know, a bit of you know, urban planning is needed, and a bit of new investment, because sometimes, as we said, all you need is a seed. we've seen Mercado. It's, as you said, it's a mixed-use project. Suddenly now we have apartments all down, we have shops, we have food trucks, we have, and at the end of the day, it was one seed. At the end of the day, one project is small in terms of all of this. But again, a seed is small, but it can grow a whole tree. So this is absolutely what I want to reach to as well. Okay, we have a few more questions if we have time for it. Julie, you have a few more questions.
Were there a specific urban planning guidelines on the terminal in Adliya? Did you face any complications pre-construction?
So these complications, there are always challenges with any project. This is organization, we have to live up to the higher standard. So we need to make sure that our projects, make sense and have a positive impact. And we have to be very careful about how we impact the economic and social environment around us.
I think in terms of questions, I think you've answered them all with great diligence. And, all I can say is thank you very much, Mr. Amin, for taking this time to speak to us today. We've been very enlightened and to know what you've been up to and certainly more about your mandate. It's obviously not something you spread around the papers or the media on a daily basis. So getting to know you personally and your organization, certainly from my point of view, I see a lot more of a softer side to Edamah than I actually anticipated because, as I said, not much people know about your social interests, your environmental interests, certain support you've been given to societies and otherwise. And it's a very commendable, direction from an organization, but also from a vision and a board as well. Because obviously we not to compare, but maybe more neighboring government-backed developers are a lot more ruthless. They're a lot more bigger scale. And I think in this case, we are sure that Edamah, by its mother, the government has a lot more resources to be a lot more aggressive and ruthless. But at the same time, has to understand that yes, you are a government, you are a regulator, but also there is opportunities to make money for the people you are basically trying to regulate. But also allowing them an opportunity to, or should I say, allowing the private sector to have its, space or room for development. As we talked about this in class as well, especially related to وزارة الإسكان and بنك الإسكان. بالعكس, التزاحم or repetition in one thing might be the diversification of saying, okay, this entity is focusing on social housing, this entity is focusing on commercial. You mentioned obviously an interest, or let's say a room for development when it comes to with hospitality. I think I totally agree. And I think in addition to hospitality, maybe another sector which needs strong roots and foundations, which is entertainment. So maybe entertainment with a bit of F&B. We look at examples, let's say in the UAE, like Last Exit or City Walk. Basically we're talking about Miras developments in UAE. So I'm sure there is certain lines available, and I think maybe Edamah's role in the next 3 years will be more vital than ever because obviously, as you know, this recession hit us hard. To show confidence, we have to invest. We cannot be inviting others to invest when we haven't done it ourselves. So I think the role of Edamah is very important, and I think luckily, unfortunately, this Edamah, let's say, has happened while you have completed already a few projects under your belt. You're on the let's say clearance of offer. My final question is there anything next? So any new projects coming up that we know? Obviously, I think the one that we haven't addressed is the Saada project, and I think that's early days, but early days of being filled. But anything new on the horizon for Edamah?
So Anna, I like the way that you talked about the seeding and that aspect. We use a term that we consider ourselves a catalytic investor. Now, a catalyst is something that encourages or interacts with others to also kind of move in the right direction, right? And so one of the things that we have as part of our strategy going forward, and this impacts Bilaj, it impacts the work that we've done for Al-Adliya, and Salmaniya, is that we want to be that first mover. We want to be that seed. We want to be the catalyst. We want to be the investor that once we invest, all of a sudden 5 or 6 investors come and they say, you know what, now is the time to build a restaurant in Adliya because there's car parking. Or now's the time to do something at Bilaj because there's a master plan and there's a developer that's putting infrastructure. So definitely the type of projects going forward will all fall into this category, and you will start to hear about Edamah being involved and being responsible for bigger and bigger projects. I can't go into too much detail about the future because we still have to get our approvals, and we always like to demonstrate success rather than talk about what we will do. We always like to walk the walk. We want to demonstrate on our success. So what I can tell you is that we will be doing more catalytic type projects, more of the type of projects that will encourage others to invest. And so we will have an exponential impact. It will not just be the impact of the money that we will put into projects, but the multiplicative impact of the others that will come. And so this is really how you can encourage economic growth. It's by seeding and encouraging others to also put money and to start to develop.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you. And Lax, it's been absolutely brilliant speaking to you today. I mean, and again, as I said, giving more about yourself and the organization you represent and the direction it's basically taking. I thank you very much, and inshallah we can meet in the near future in a more physical capacity. Inshallah, we pray that everything cools down and sets down. At the same time, we wish you all the best and success in your existing projects and the new things. I'm sure we'll be excited to hear in due course when you're actually there. The only thing I ask, just before we shoot off, we usually take a picture with our guests, but obviously in this circumstance, we take a screenshot. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll just take a quick screenshot.
Go ahead.
To commemorate this moment. Faisal, do you want to set up a bit? Okay, so you don't look like a dwarf. Okay. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Amin, inshallah.
Thank you.
Back in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and I wish you all the best. And I wanted to take you up on the request. If you do want a follow-up meeting, maybe in a few months' time, please go ahead and just arrange it. You know my office, and you have my contacts. Yes. All the best.
Thank you, Mr. Amin, and see you in the near future.